This is where we hold them! This is where we fight! This is where they die! And these shield boys!
Hey everybody, how you doing? This is xrp.spartan. This is crypto. Let's get into it. So first things first, happy Mother's Day to all the moms out there. And happy Mother's Day to all the single fathers taking care of their kids, because I was there once upon a time myself. But let's get into this. We got market cap at $1.1 trillion. Still bleeding off a little bit. Looking for that good little buy zone. I'm a buyer at XRP at like 28 cents. We got Bitcoin coming in at 26,836. It's jumping around right now. It's down 0.2% on the last 24 hours. XRP coming in at 0. Basically, we've leveled off in the last 24 hours at 42 cents. Then we have Casper coming in. Maybe I'll add a couple other tokens that, I hold that I like, that I'm kind of interested in. We have Casper coming in at 5 cents flat. It's up 2% in 24 hour zone. Today I wanted to kind of talk about security and how to protect your crypto and things that I've done to protect my crypto and how I hold it and everything else. So one of the things I've done is I've went and got a hardware wallet. So what I've done is I've loaded my cryptos onto the hardware wallet, at least the ones I can get off exchanges. It would be great if Uphold would let me get my Casper off of there, because I was watching a tutorial the other day on how to stake it with Kevin Cage. He's really smart guy. He knows the ins and outs of how to get things staked and how to hook up wallets with CasperWallet.io and things like that. So after I've downloaded my stuff onto my hardware wallet, I wrote down my 24-word key. My 24-word key sits in a safety deposit box inside of a bank. Sounds kind of silly, but considering we know how banks are. I do keep my ledger inside of a fireproof, waterproof bag. That way, if somebody does get to the wallet, they're not going to have the 24-word password, because it's going to be inside of a bank. So that's kind of how I protect my crypto, and a VPN, stuff like that. I was also told that you can have security breaches happen through your phone. That's one of the ways that sometimes hackers get us. Anything you get, like a link or something like that, always assume it's a scam first, then work backwards. Like, for example, I had my bank called me the other day. Somebody was trying to get into my account, and it was just one of them recorded things. So what I did is I accepted the call, but while I accepted the call, put them on hold while I was calling the bank. Then when I switched back over, I told the guy I was calling the bank, and he started tripping. Excuse me real quick. So it was funny. He just started cussing me out because I wasn't buying his BS. Another thing I do to kind of protect myself from inflation with the dollar is Glint. Now, I'm not getting paid to talk about these things. These are just things that I actually do to protect myself. So I use Glint. They do send you physical bars of gold if you want them to. Bit of a premium on there to get that done, but it's one of the safest ways to go ahead for me to get my gold. Also, too, you can buy, save, send, and spend with Glint. I mean, it really is real allocated gold to you. I mean, you can get as little as you want or as much as you want. Now, they won't send you a bar underneath 10 grams. But, if you want a 21-pound bar, I think that's the max amount they can send you. I don't have a 21-pound bar. I wish I did. So, that's one of the things I do. What do we got here? I'm just going to kind of show you this because I think it's really interesting. I am part of Brad Kimes' Digital Perspectives Mastermind group. There's a lot of great things in here that I've learned personally that's helped me along the way with, you know, the way my mindset works when it comes to money, different ways, you know, topics and things like that, like, you know, what is a spendthrift trust, LLCs, and just ways for you to really try to manage your wealth. And then today I wanted to go ahead and finish our little segment of the history of money, because I wanted to keep to my word, not get off track and go squirrel. So here this is. I'm going to go ahead and cue this up for you.
Far into the 20th century, because it's hard to have historical perspective on events that are that close to our own time. But today we're going to have to roar into the latter half of the 20th century to show you just how recently this idea came to be. This idea that seems so normal, that we all take for granted as if it were always the case. The idea that money is worth something because we all agree it is. Last time, we talked about the growth of central banks as a patch system to fix the numerous problems that occur when you introduce paper money as the basis for an economy. But for many people, one more step was required to really inspire confidence in this idea of taking milled tree bark in return for their labor, and that was the gold standard. The gold standard is basically the idea that your paper money is backed in gold, that at any time you could take your paper bills somewhere and redeem them for a specified amount of gold. Now, I hear a lot of you say, why would you ever do that? Doesn't putting a currency on the gold standard just mean that we're back to the problem we were trying to solve in the first place? By tying money to gold, aren't we once again limiting the money supply? The short answer to that is yes, and we're gonna see just how that plays out. The longer answer is, sort of. This is a pretty complicated economic question, too complex to really get into here, but the concise version is that having paper money backed in gold, rather than using gold directly, allows far more options when you need to expand the money supply. And it has the advantage of letting you play fast and loose with the system when you need to. But still, why would you do this rather than have your currency float free? Well, that's where history comes in. You see, the gold standard solves two major problems. The first is inflation. As you can probably guess, it wasn't long after people started printing paper money that they figured that they could just print a lot of paper money. Way more paper money than they could ever redeem. Way more than even our fractional reserve banking system thinks is sane. As soon as people did that, you started to get inflation. And it could still happen even with a central currency controlled by the government, because when countries needed to, say, pay for an army, they would sometimes just print more bills to do it. More bills means that each bill is worth less, which was a problem, not only for those poor citizens whose life savings were now in paper bills, but also for other countries who'd been accepting those paper bills in exchange for their goods. Which brings us to the second major issue that the gold standard addresses: exchange rates. Right as paper money was becoming the standard in Europe, international trade was really starting to pick up. The Industrial Revolution was getting into full swing, and raw materials and finished goods had to be shipped and traded at a pace never before seen. Simultaneously, mercantilism, that isolationist monetary policy that we discussed in an earlier episode, is coming to an end, causing trade to rocket to even greater heights. But what happens when your ship full of cargo docks in some foreign port, and you try to hand the local merchant your funny green paper money to buy their goods, while they try to hand you their funny pink paper money to buy what you've got on your ship? Well, you both just sit there scratching your heads for a while. Back in the day, you would have just weighed whatever coins they were trying to give you and accept them for their weight in gold. But now they're handing you this piece of paper that you don't recognize and you have no idea how to value. I mean, can you even trade this specific piece of paper for anything when you get back home? But if both currencies are on the gold standard, problem solved. Just as an example, let's say that at any time, you could turn in $20 to get 1 ounce of gold. 1 ounce of gold is what your $20 are worth. Now, let's say you sail to England, where, for the sake of keeping things simple, the UK has set their gold standard so that an ounce of gold is worth 2 British pounds. This makes everything nice and simple. Since you're both operating on the gold standard, that means 1 British pound is the equivalent in value to $10. Done and done, simple. So how does this all fall apart? Well, first we have to talk about how it all began. If you saw our episodes on the First Opium War, remember how we talked about the fact that all of Britain's silver was flowing into China to buy tea? Well, to solve all the problems I just talked about, the British were looking for some commodity to back the Bank of England notes with. But with all their silver gone, the British chose gold, and soon basically everybody followed suit. But this system had its own breaking points. Absolute adherence to the gold standard had to be suspended several times during the 1800s due to the massive expenses incurred by international war. But in England, as in most other countries, there was always a return to the gold standard in peacetime, with countries working to build their gold reserves back up and limiting the printing of further notes. Other minor shocks, like the California Gold Rush and other introductions of
can you see how, in times of crisis, everybody wants to come off the gold standard? It looks like for once in history, this crisis that we're heading into looks like they're going to have to go back to the gold standard. Or banks know what's going to happen because it's history and it repeats itself, that China, Russia, all of them are stockpiling gold. They know something's coming. They'll have their money to be able to back it by the gold standard. If they do that, they would naturally have to up the price and value of gold to something more realistic. I'm hoping between $35,000 to $4,000 an ounce. That's why I got Glint.
massive new sources of gold would cause the system to lurch, but overall, use of the gold standard held up pretty well throughout the 19th century. Then came World War I, the seminal catastrophe, the shatterer of so many notions from our past. And like so many other things, the gold standard crumpled under the impossible needs of the war. Nation after nation abandoned gold to print more money to pay for the arms, munitions, and men that were being expended daily on the field. And as more and more money was printed and spent to feed the insatiable hunger of this war, trade became erratic. Trade from the United States grew far beyond what the gold reserves of Europe could bear. Inflation ran rampant, and after the war, many countries couldn't drag themselves back to the gold standard. Some nations, like Germany, who were spiraling into hyperinflation under the crushing debt of war reparations, tried to stabilize their currency by backing it in land rather than gold. Others, like England, appealed to people's patriotism and wrenched themselves back onto the gold standard by asking people not to redeem their money for gold just out of love of country. But even this fell apart as the Great Depression hit. Those few countries that had the wherewithal to stay on the gold standard, like the United States, were now hamstrung by how the inflexibility of gold prevented them from reacting to the crisis. And yet, many people and many nations thought of this as a temporary hiccup. Sure, the war and the depression had made a mess of things, but soon the good times would be back. Things would get sorted out, and everybody would get back on the gold standard. I mean, they had to, right? Without the gold standard, how is money worth anything? But those good times didn't have a chance to come back, because then came the big one, World War II. World War II was perhaps the most expensive war in history. Economically, it was totally unsustainable, with the US racking up enormous trade surpluses and every other country involved sinking into massive debt. But the world had learned from World War I, and as World War II wound down, many of the major powers met to work out the first real international monetary agreement, the famous Bretton Woods system. You see, following the First World War, Britain had owed the US a huge pile of money, which they couldn't pay back unless France paid them a huge pile of money it owed them. But much of the war had occurred on French soil, and the French couldn't afford to pay back the British unless they basically made the defeated Germans pay for everything. This, of course, had all been a disaster that caused huge financial and political instability. So this time around, things would be different. Reparations would be minimized. Repayment of reparations would be on gentler terms, and that whole problem of wildly unstable currency caused by countries like Germany no longer being able to adhere to the gold standard after World War I, this time the currency instability problem would be solved. And how would it be solved? Well, at this point in history, the US basically had everybody's gold, because everybody had bought a ton of stuff from the US for the two biggest wars in history. So the US actually was still on the gold standard. So the solution was simple. Peg everybody else's currency to the US dollar. That's right, the system essentially boiled down to the US dollar is redeemable in gold, and all other currencies are redeemable in US dollars. And so every country had to keep some dollars on hand to redeem their currency, which is how the US dollar became the reserve currency for basically the entire world. As other nations' economies recovered, the dollar became overvalued. This came to a head in 1965. Charles de Gaulle, who had always been a little bit miffy about America's position in the world, decided that he was going to act on that redeemability. So he sent the French Navy to cash in and pick up his bullion, literally bringing boatloads of gold back to France. Soon, other nations followed suit. By 1971, with the dollar still overvalued and the Cold War and wars like Korea and Vietnam draining US resources and sending US gold overseas, Richard Nixon finally took the step that many argued had to come, and took the US dollar off the gold standard. Just take that in for a moment. 1971. Less than 50 years ago. But here's where it gets good. When Nixon pulled the US off the gold standard, the shock was felt around the world, but it didn't stop many countries from still pegging their currency to the US dollar. So now you had currencies around the world redeemable for US dollars, and the US dollar pegged to nothing. Soon, many other countries decided just to let their currencies float, to let them be valued at what the market would bear. And so, just like that, almost by accident, after 6,000 years, we finally accepted money as an idea rather than a thing. Or, as John Law would say, we accepted money as the medium by which things are exchanged, not the value for which they are. Thanks for watching. We'll see you next time.
Alright everybody, that was the video for today. Hopefully, you can use your noodle and link how everything looks very similar. And I will catch you guys later. Make sure you hit that like and subscribe. Greatly appreciate you watching. Have a good Mother's Day.